Hi, Kevin Martin here, your UT admissions guy. Here today to talk about college admissions essays and the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. So in this video, I'll overview two possibilities for submitting special circumstances on your UT Austin Apply Texas application, and also a new prompt from the Common Application that is allowing students to discuss if and how and whether they were affected by COVID-19. So last year, UT Austin started this fourth and optional kind of academic special circumstances short answer. That prompt reads, please share background on events or special circumstances that may have impacted your high school academic performance. And that's just kind of generally broadly speaking. But specifically on the Common Application, they allow a maximum of 250 words. Again, it's completely optional, but you can discuss. Community disruptions such as COVID-19 and natural disasters can have deep and long-lasting impacts. If you need it, this space is to help you describe those impacts. Colleges care about the effects on your health and well-being, safety, family circumstances, future plans, and education, including access to reliable technology and quiet study spaces. So similar to UT Austin, this also encompasses kind of a broad special circumstances, including but not limited to COVID-19. So for example, if there's a substantial hurricane in the next few months, you could use that Common Application optional essay to share what was going on. So I think, one rule of thumb that sometimes or most of the time works, but in this instance doesn't work, is you don't need to write these essays if it doesn't apply to you. The rule of thumb is if it's optional or recommended, you should do it. That might apply to things like UT Austin's expanded resume or SAT subject tests for places like MIT. But here, optional truly means not necessary unless it applies to you and your family. And if you only need a few sentences to discuss these disruptions or special circumstances, consider simply working them into one of the required essays rather than doing like a full-blown essay that may not be necessary. And so for now, I'm recommending a high threshold for whether you should discuss the coronavirus, especially given that literally every student and family in the United States and almost everywhere around the world has been affected somehow by the pandemic. The first question I would encourage you to ask yourself is, how is my situation uniquely different from my classmates or people from similar backgrounds? Answering this question, I understand, will require an unusual degree of self-awareness and an understanding of how the pandemic affects society, not just your personal life, but it will be important to situate your application among the sea of other college applications, many of which are going to be discussing the coronavirus pandemic. So I'll run through a quick list, and again I have a post on my blog that shares a lot of this in more detail, but I'll overview some potential disruptions or adverse circumstances that may be grounds for discussing coronavirus in your essays. Obviously, if you've contracted the virus or experienced complications, tell your reviewer. If an immediate family member was hospitalized or they passed away, discuss it. But again, if you're just having mild or asymptomatic cases, perhaps consider including it in a few sentences, but not necessarily blowing it up into a full essay. If one or both of your parents has lost their job or your family's primary source of income, talk about it. A parent is a high-risk medical professional or essential worker. You work a job that is an essential skills job, like for example, if you're an Uber driver or delivery driver, or if you are working at a cash register somewhere. If you're unable to access stimulus or other social service benefits, for example, PPE loans, that might affect you and your family. If you have experienced housing disruptions like the inability to pay rent, if you or your family was evicted, or some other displacement resulting in temporary or permanent homelessness or transience, definitely share that with reviewers. Maybe you've taken in other family members or friends who have lost their homes. It's possible, and there's many families out there who are experiencing food insecurity, either because they're too afraid or unable to leave their homes, or they're unable to afford their food. If you've experienced visa or immigration issues in the event of being a kind of a non-citizen resident. Also, if you have the inability to leave, and this is heartbreakingly true for thousands, tens of thousands of students across the U.S. and around the world, if you're unable to leave abusive or neglectful households due to the lockdown or social distancing requirements, if you've experienced mental, emotional, or psychological distress, or even suicidal ideation, that's something you can talk about in your essays. If you've had an amplification of pre-existing medical conditions or an inability to receive regular treatment, that especially if it impacts your schoolwork or overall well-being, talk about that. That's another rule of thumb too, is that if you are writing about coronavirus, you should make explicit connections between how it's inhibited your educational, academic, extracurricular opportunities. You can also talk about if you actually don't have access to educational opportunities. For example, if your school has not adequately transitioned to online classes, if you don't have adequate internet access at home, or you live in a noisy or full household, or maybe your house doesn't own a computer or a smartphone, certainly tell your admissions reviewers that, especially if your grades decreased during that spring semester, junior year, spring sophomore year. And if your school is converted to a pass-fail system that does not sufficiently account for your academic progress, maybe talk a little bit about that, but you don't want to spend paragraphs talking about, something that may not be as significant relative to others. You might also discuss if you've been unable to take for the first time or retake the SAT or ACT, but with so many universities going test optional nowadays, I don't anticipate being that much of an issue. You can also share about complications with AP exams or canceled plans over the summer like camps or research opportunities, internships, also cancellations during the spring for your academic, athletic, music competitions, or if things are already being anticipated for cancellation in the fall, or you've otherwise had a change of plans. Another option, in addition to writing about this in your essays, is to flag on your resume if something was canceled or disrupted due to the pandemic. I know there's students who are qualifying for state, national, international mathematics or computer science or music or robotics competitions, and they're really disappointed. They're like, oh, I wanted to compete and I wanted to include that accomplishment on my resume, but I can't. Well, you can just signal to your reviewer like, hey, I wanted to do this and it just didn't quite work out. Admissions reviewers are never going to judge you negatively for something that you didn't do. Like my life, all of their lives and their careers have been affected as well. So your admissions reviewer is going to be understanding. However, I wouldn't sort of overplay your hand. I think there might be a tendency for students who feel like they need to force an essay by either exaggerating minor inconveniences or even writing with hyperbole. If you do choose to write about COVID-19, stick to the facts, write clearly and precisely, and directly how coronavirus affected or is currently affecting you and your family. And if something truly awful has happened, like the loss of a loved one or you yourself getting seriously ill, please write about it. And if you do choose to write a separate essay like that optional short answer for UT or the optional common application special circumstances, it's important to provide new information that wasn't mentioned in another essay. And this is true of all the essays, but don't be repetitive in your college applications. So I'll talk about some potential essay configurations. I see three broad possible approaches for discussing these disruptions. One, you can dedicate your entire Applied Texas Essay A or your Common Application essay. I mean, that's obviously in the situation where you've been severely or dramatically or catastrophically affected by the pandemic, and it truly is essential to your story or identity. You can also share information, of course, in those dedicated short answer optional essays, or discussing it a little bit by fitting it into one of the required essays. I think it's especially important for applicants to be mindful of both the content and the tone of your essay should you discuss the pandemic. Again, it comes back to not writing with hyperbole or exaggeration. And I have to imagine that most applicants are simply not going to fall under this very high standard of a world-shattering category of experiencing significant trauma or hardship. So again, stick to the facts. And, and again, I think one thing I'm already seeing is literally every school has experienced some changes in grading policies, whether it's my GPA suffered or, oh man, I was doing great. And then now it's pass fail or everybody got 100. And everybody is missing out on summer activities, competitions and camps. Lots of things are going online. A lot of applicants are not going to be able to take the SAT or ACT or improve their exams. But again, if you're in the same or a similar boat to your classmates, then maybe perhaps forgo writing those optional essays. I also understand that what might appear like a minor setback or an inconvenience to an outsider may seem like something significant or life-altering to you. And I don't say this next piece of advice to be callous or cold, but you have to understand who you're writing to, your admissions audience, and how they're the ones that are ultimately the arbiter of deciding, what role you're communicating, COVID-19 in the broader context of your application will play. Their understanding will also be relative to their own personal experiences, their own potential political views, and the dozens of and perhaps hundreds of other COVID-19 related essays that they're undoubtedly going to read. So again, keep in mind that many applicants are going to choose to write about the pandemic, and some of them will be definitely experiencing things that are truly distressing and traumatic. So your reviewer is going to see a wide variety of responses. And so if you make a mountain out of a molehill, your reviewer is probably going to know, and you're not going to be doing yourself any favors, and you may even damage your application depending on the tone and how you approach discussing COVID-19 in your essays and whether you choose to. You can also assume that your reader definitely knows what coronavirus and the COVID-19 pandemic is. You don't need to write to them like they're an alien from another planet. This sounds crazy nowadays, but when I worked for UT, especially in the early 2010s, I can't tell you the number of times applicants would describe the mechanics of an iPhone, or talk about how social media works, or what a tweet is. Your reviewer is going to know what COVID-19 is. Literally, it's one of the only conversations in the whole world that everybody's having to some degree. I think there's also potential for students to fall into some cliches. And I think there's one understandable cliche that I'm already anticipating, that I've already seen in a few of my clients' essays, especially related to their choosing majors like biology, public health, and social work, because they think, oh, I want to go and save the world. You have even more applicants than before who think that they want to be pre-med. But I'm already seeing though, I want to be a doctor to help people. It's just it's a well-trodden cliche and trope that is going to lead to eye rolling from your admissions reviewers. I'm thinking especially for UT Austin's first choice major short answer. It's obviously fine if your academic interest and future ambitions are relating to the COVID-19 pandemic, but realize there's going to be like an exponential increase in pre-med ambitious public health people that are wanting to save the world from the current or future pandemics. Just be mindful that you're going to be writing against countless others who essentially are going to be writing the exact same essays about wanting to be hero doctors, or the next epidemiological breakthrough in a laboratory, or someone working in the field. And if you do choose this route where you're linking your major to a potential career, do as much homework as you can about potential majors that are addressing public health and economic catastrophes. So you need to be as specific as possible, and conveying a nuanced and mature tone will be especially important. Another rule of thumb to help you decide whether to write about coronavirus is to distinguish whether something happened to you or your immediate family, or is it that you've missed out on something that would have happened without the pandemic. And missing out on something like potentially raising your grades, or something about pass-fail, is honestly materially different than something happening directly to you, like contracting the virus, or something significant happening to a loved one. It's sort of like with Hurricane Harvey, right? It obviously affected everybody in the Southeast Texas, southern Louisiana corridor, but there's a big difference between having your house flooded and one of your friends having their house damaged, right? So maybe only keep the scope directly to you and your immediate family. I wouldn't write a whole essay about a friend of yours that got sick. And my final rule of thumb is, again, to not be discouraging, but to encourage you that if you feel like you need to share something, it is always better to err on the side of disclosure rather than omission. So your admissions reviewer will only know as much as you tell them. They're also not mind readers. They don't have crystal balls that share everything that's going on with your school, their grading policies. Provide the content, but be careful to strike a measured and balanced tone. I already can imagine a scenario where, spring of 2021, people are going to get rejected from UT Austin and other universities, and then they're going to try and appeal, with something related to the pandemic during, summer of 2020. But if you think that you want to provide that information, you need to do it now in your college essays. And the other thing too, that and the opposite of students that are making a mountain out of a molehill, I've already worked with students who are my mom has been hospitalized for 4 weeks and they've passed away, but I don't want to be seen as a pity party, or trying to get sympathy, but please share that stuff. If you have experienced something significant, please inform your admissions reviewer about it. Let them know what's going on. So I know that these are really troubling and uncertain times. I hope that this video has provided a little bit of clarity on whether and how you should approach coronavirus in your college admissions essays. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can complete my questionnaire to receive a free email consultation. I'm always interested in taking on freshmen and transfer clients. The easiest way to reach out to me is to email directly at kevin@texasadmissions.com. All of this information can be found in the information section of this video. If you've made it this far, thanks for your time, and I hope you have a great day.